All right, welcome back to Primetime Morning. Now, this is a silent killer. It's known to many as economy class syndrome, and it can happen after people sit still in tight quarters for a long time.
The condition is also known as deep vein thrombosis, or DVT, which means a blood clot that's developed in your vein, and it's usually in the leg.
Now, it's not necessarily long-haul travelers who are at risk. In fact, in Asia, a gamer addict who played online for 14 hours a day collapsed and nearly died because of DVT.
And in fact, a study in the region reported a 5-fold increase in the incidence of DVT from 1988 to 1999 rather.
Right. So how do you safeguard yourself from DVT? Well, earlier I spoke to vascular surgeon Dr. John Henry Skur and also began by asking him what economy class syndrome is.
DVT, or blood clots in the deep vein, occur because of immobility. If you sit still for long periods of time, the blood will set. Economy class syndrome is perhaps a bad name. It implies that people traveling in economy classes, in aeroplanes. In fact, it applies to people, all modes of travel, boats, buses, cars, as well as aeroplanes. It affects people traveling in business class and first class because they sit still too. People traveling business and first class also travel more frequently, and so the risk to them increases still more.
So it's not necessarily those who are traveling economy class, you have a higher possibility of getting DVT. It just applies to travelers across the board.
All travelers across the board. It really depends on how long you travel for. Obviously, the longer the flight, the greater the risk, and how frequently you travel.
So it doesn't really matter whether you're in business class or in first class?
No, it doesn't. You have the same sort of risks.
So how do you know that you face the risk of DVT?
Well, this is the problem. Most people who get a DVT will not know about it. Over half the cases, you don't see anything at all. In many of those cases, the clot will go away, but it increases the risk next time. If you're unlucky enough to get a big clot, the leg will swell, it's obvious, you can get treatment. If you're unlucky, a bit of that clot can break off and go to the lung.
And DVT is potentially fatal. We've heard of some cases. Now, how so?
Yeah, that's the point. If it's a large clot that breaks off and goes to the lung, it can kill you. Fortunately, that doesn't happen too often. If it does, it's a disaster. Sometimes you can tell or you can predict which passengers are at risk. If they're old, if they've got a previous history of blood clots, the risk increases. But what we're really concerned about are the majority of travellers who, by and large, can travel very safely, but there are a small number of them who are at increased risk, who won't know about it, and it's that group of passengers that we need to give some prophylactic agent to.
Well, in today's world where everywhere is a frequent traveller, they all have, they travel around the world through flights. We even have a lot of long-haul flights coming up, new ones. Now, what are the precautions that one can take to avoid a DVT?
Right. Before you get on an aeroplane, it's very important that you take plenty of exercise. You can exercise on the aeroplane by walking around the aeroplane. Not always easy to do that. And you can exercise when you get off. You can drink plenty of water during the flight. You can avoid drinking too much alcohol. Those simple precautions will help you. But we really need something a little bit more than that to be really safe. And in the past, people have advocated things like aspirin, but aspirin can cause bleeding. And it was for that reason that we developed Xinapin, which is a combination of products. They're all foods products which you can take, which improve the circulation during flight.
So this is the Xinapin that you're talking about?
This is the Xinapin.
And how do we consume it? You've actually had some yourself.
Yes, this is me, in fact, traveling to Singapore. I've taken half of the dose.
So this one to come and this one to go back?
Go back, absolutely. You take one tablet the day before you travel, two on the day you travel, and then one the next day and one the day after.
And when we talk about long-haul flights, how long are we talking about? How many hours exactly?
Well, again, it's immobility. Typically, a long-haul flight is a flight over 5 hours, but as somebody pointed out, you can travel to the airport, you can sit in the airport, you can take a 2-hour flight, you're actually sitting still for 5 hours. I mean, the concern is that we are now traveling for longer. And one of the reasons why this condition is only now being recognized is because we're only now able to travel these great distances.
And do those passengers who appear with a DVT after a long flight already have a blood condition that makes them more likely to have a blood clot?
Yes, I think you can identify passengers who are more likely to get blood clots. That, in a way, is quite easy because you can give them simple precautions, you can give them anticoagulants. It's the group that we don't know about. 10% of the population have a condition called thrombophilia, an increased tendency to form blood clots. And so this can affect young people, both men and women. It's that group of people who are at risk, and of course they don't know they're at risk.
And you earlier mentioned that one wouldn't know if he or she had a blood clot. So would you recommend passengers after their flight, after their long flight, to go and see the doctor?
No, not routinely. I think if you are worried about flying and you've had previous problems, then it's sensible to go and seek medical advice. For the majority of passengers, you can travel safely, you can buy your Zinapin, you can get on the flight, you can take exercises, you can get off. The people who should see somebody when they get off the flight are people who present with swelling of the leg, particularly if it's one leg. I think a lot of passengers will get swelling of both ankles, and that's fairly normal. But if you get one leg swollen, that can be symptomatic of a blood clot. If you get chest symptoms, again, you should see somebody.
So give me an example of an exercise that I could do when I'm on my seat in the plane to prevent a DVT, and how often I should get up to walk around, like you mentioned.
The more active you are, the better. And if you can get up and you can walk around the aeroplane, perhaps every hour you can move up and down the aeroplane, that works very well. Sitting in your seat, just moving your feet up and down, is not terribly effective. If you can do it against resistance, and there are a number of cushions that you can tread on and push up and down on, that's an effective form of exercise. The difficulty is people won't actually do that. And that's why taking a simple pill is a very easy, very effective way of doing it.
And well, that was Dr. John Henry Scott telling us all about the economy class syndrome and also ways of avoiding it. Now, where were you when I was doing that interview?
I was actually in economy class, but I was up moving around and I took my aspirin.
Hopefully you did some exercises as well.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
All right, well, speaking of exercise, it's time now to flex your muscles. We'll give your hips and waist a workout with Muscle a Day.